A one-day summit with the 27 leaders of the European Union concluded in Brussels. While the bloc's geopolitical focus may have shifted to the Middle East, Russia's invasion of Ukraine occupied a great share of the debate on Thursday. Ukraine's president addressed the event via video conference to discuss the latest developments on the battlefield, his country's financial health, and the urgency to step up military support. For more, let's speak to our foreign editor, Kathevane Gorjestani. Hello to you. Kathevane, so Ukraine placing a lot of hope in European leaders ahead of the summit. Did it deliver?
It was sort of a mixed bag for the Ukrainians out of Brussels. So we're going to start with the positives, the glass half full. The Europeans agreed in their final communique to continue and increase support for Ukraine, specifically military support, air defense system, air drone, anti-drone systems, ammunition, all of that, and to continue supporting Ukraine in its defense industry, because they realized that the Ukrainians can actually build all of that much faster than the Europeans can, but they need funding for that to happen. Then one of the key positives was the presence in the text of a very clear support for Ukraine keeping on the path of the EU membership. The EU remains steadfast in its support of Ukraine's path towards EU membership. Finally, the bloc agreeing to extend the current sanctions on Russia, despite some worry, some concerns over what Hungary might do in the end. The things like the freeze of Russia's assets or the sanctions on thousands of entities and officials, that's going to stay. However, the bloc failed to pass a new package of sanctions, which is what the Ukrainians really wanted, a toughening of sanctions. That is because of opposition from Slovakia that said that it would veto any new package because of a separate disagreement over the sort of phase out of Russian gas imports into the bloc. So there is still clear support from the Europeans, but they are not, unfortunately for the Ukrainians right now, going more roughly against Russia, which is what they actually intended to do.
Yeah, you mentioned at the top, looking at this with a glass half full perspective. If we continue that analogy, this is still a bit more than what Ukraine got out of the NATO meeting.
Absolutely, because yes, Zelensky wasn't physically in Brussels, but he did speak to these leaders while in The Hague at the NATO summit. He was physically present. He did meet with some leaders, but he was not invited at the main event, not invited to speak at the plenary session. And if you look at it, you saw clearly explicit support for that European path that I was mentioning, whereas NATO actually refrained from putting that same language in its declaration, in large part because of U.S. opposition. And that is a huge change from the previous NATO declaration of 2024, where they spoke about the irreversible path of Ukraine to joining NATO. The declaration this time in NATO barely mentioning Ukraine, and only really in the context of we need to defend Ukraine because it is good for the broader security of the alliance, not specifically because of a principle. So it is clear that the Europeans, when the Americans are not there, have managed to support Ukraine more in their language than when the Americans are there at NATO.
And what does this diplomatic week tell us about shifting attitudes towards Ukraine and Russia?
Well, that there's a growing gap between attitudes from Europe and attitudes from the United States. And just a few examples, while Europe didn't pass new sanctions, it's not because most of the bloc didn't want to. It's because of Slovakia. Meanwhile, the United States, they're not passing new sanctions because Donald Trump is not ready to pass new sanctions. He thinks that Russia wants a deal. And it was the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who really summed it up. He said when he was at NATO, if we did what everybody here wants us to do, that is, crush them, the Russians, with more sanctions, we probably would lose our ability to talk to them about a ceasefire. So that is still the strategy of the Americans. They believe that Russia can still come to the negotiating table. Europe sees Russia as an existential threat, while the Trump administration is trying to downplay that threat. In the meantime, Russia is continuing to make gains on the ground in Ukraine. The question is, could that attitude by the United States change a little bit? Donald Trump acknowledging that maybe Vladimir Putin had ambitions beyond Ukraine, and there is a U.S. sanctions package ready to go in Congress. They're still waiting for the green light from Donald Trump.
All right, Kathevane, thank you very much. Kathevane Gorjestani, our foreign editor.